Hey there. Tonight we're not just telling a story, we're stepping into one. You are no longer just the viewer. You are the witness. You are walking the dusty back roads of Colombia in the early 90s. The sun is hot. The wind carries whispers. And somewhere between the banana plantations and forgotten villages, a monster is watching. His name? Luis Alfredo Garavito. But to the children he targeted, he was simply uncle, teacher, or sometimes just a stranger with candy. Between 1992 and 1999, this man confessed to the murders of over 138 young boys, though some believe the real number could be far higher. Boys vanished, parents cried, villages mourned, and justice tried to keep up. But this isn't just a crime story. It's a study in evil, in manipulation, in silence. Over the next 30 nights, we'll take you through his life, his crimes, his capture, and the haunting legacy he left behind. Each chapter is a piece of the puzzle. So, dim the lights, breathe deeply, and remember, this is history, dark history, the kind they never taught you in school. Let's begin. The year is 1992. The place? A quiet village nestled in the green hills of Colombia, where the air smells of coffee and damp soil, and children run barefoot through dust-filled streets. It is here, beneath the surface of everyday life, that something dark begins to stir. You are walking home from school, the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the dirt road. You're no older than 10, maybe 11. You're wearing a worn-out shirt and plastic sandals. You're holding your younger brother's hand. You laugh. You feel safe. For now. But not far off, hidden behind a clump of banana trees, a man watches you. He's tall, thin, unremarkable. His face blends into the background, a face you'd forget if you saw it twice. He wears a simple shirt, jeans, and a hat pulled low. To anyone watching, he looks like any other adult. Maybe a farmer, maybe a teacher, maybe a relative. His name is Luis Alfredo Garavito. He is 42 years old, but he moves with the patience of a predator. He has no job, no family waiting for him, just a twisted desire buried deep inside. One that has been growing since he was a boy himself, abused, abandoned, and angry at the world. Tonight, he has chosen a target. You. But you don't know that yet. You keep walking, laughing, holding hands. The man follows at a distance, waiting for the right moment, the right place, the right boy. This is how it began. Not with blood, not with screams, but with a shadow, a smile, a lie, and a little boy who had no reason to fear the world. The boy you were. The one walking home that evening. Never made it back to his house. At least, not the way he expected. You turned down a narrow path that cut through the edge of the forest, a shortcut you and your friends used every day. It led past an old wooden fence, a dried-up creek bed, and a cluster of boulders where local kids played marbles. It was safe. Always had been. Until now. You didn't see the man step out from behind the rocks. One moment, the path was empty. The next, there was a voice. Soft, friendly. Hey, little one. Do you know where the schoolhouse is? I'm looking for my nephew. You turned, curious. The man looked kind, older, maybe a teacher. He smiled, showing teeth that were a little too yellow. He had candy in his pocket, sweet stuff, the kind you weren't allowed to have. You hesitated, just for a second. That was all it took. Before you knew it, he had your arm. Not hard, not yet. Just enough to guide you away from the path toward the trees. You wanted to call out, but your voice caught in your throat. Something in his eyes, cold, flat, stopped you. You struggled, just a little. Then nothing. The world went dark. What happened next is something no child should ever endure. And yet, it would happen again. And again. Over 100 more times. Because Luis Alfredo Garavito wasn't done. Not even close. They never found you that night. Your mother screamed your name into the wind until her voice gave out. Your father walked the roads with a flashlight, calling for you until dawn. Neighbors joined the search. Dogs barked. Flashlights cut through the darkness. But you were gone. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, something unspeakable was happening. You had been taken to a hidden place, a small clearing surrounded by thick trees, far from any road. The kind of place no one goes unless they're looking for trouble. Garavito had been here before. He knew these spots. He had been watching them for weeks, maybe months. Planning, waiting. He tied your hands with a piece of rope he always carried. Not too tight, just enough to keep you from running. You cried. You begged. You promised you wouldn't tell. But none of it mattered. To him, you weren't a person. You were a target, something to control, to hurt, to erase. What he did to you is too horrible to put into words. But I will tell you this. It wasn't quick. It wasn't clean. And it wasn't the last time. Over the next several years, Garavito would repeat this pattern again and again. He would find vulnerable children, poor, alone, trusting, and lure them away with lies and candy. He would take them to remote places, hurt them, kill them, and leave their bodies scattered across the countryside like broken toys. He wasn't just a killer. He was a ghost. A shadow that moved through small towns and villages, always one step ahead of the law. And no one knew to look for him. Not yet. Days passed. Your family never stopped searching. Your photo was pinned to bulletin boards in every town square. Flyers fluttered in the wind outside churches and markets. Your mother stopped eating. Your father stopped sleeping. The whole village mourned you as if you were already gone. But the truth? You were gone. Your small body had been hidden beneath a pile of leaves in a ravine near the river. No one would find you for weeks, maybe months, maybe never. And Garavito? He walked back into town wearing the same blank expression he always wore. No one suspected him. He looked like everyone else, a poor man, a laborer, maybe a farmhand. He nodded politely to neighbors, smiled at children, bought bread from the same shop he always did. No one knew. No one asked questions. Because in Colombia during those years, missing children were tragically common. Poverty, violence, instability. The country was already bleeding. Another lost boy didn't stand out. But Garavito stood out. To the ghosts of the children he left behind. To the mothers who cried themselves to sleep. To the police who were already drowning in unsolved cases. He had already claimed several victims by now. Each one a boy, each one lured with a smile. Each one taken to a lonely place, each one silenced forever. And still, he wasn't done, because the monster inside him wasn't satisfied. He needed more. He always needed more. By 1993, the disappearances had become impossible to ignore. The newspapers were calling it the monster of the Andes. Parents were locking their doors. Children were warned not to talk to strangers. Teachers gave lectures about safety. But the truth was, no one knew who they were looking for. Garavito was always one step ahead. He had refined his method. He knew which towns were easiest to blend into, which children were most vulnerable. The poor ones, the ones without fathers, the ones who craved attention. He pretended to be a relative, a teacher, a friend. He offered rides, candy, a trip to the river, and then he would take them. One boy, then another, then another. Each time he followed the same pattern: gain trust, lure away, isolate, hurt, kill, hide. He kept a mental map of where he left the bodies, not because he felt guilt, but because he wanted to remember, to count, to feel powerful. By the time police began connecting the dots, Garavito had already claimed dozens of lives. Yet no one had seen his face clearly. No one had survived to tell the tale. He was a ghost with a smile, a monster in plain sight. And the worst part? No one believed a man like him could do something so horrible, not until it was too late. The first body was found in January 1993. A boy, no older than 12, was discovered near a riverbank in the town of Genova, in the department of Quindío. His clothes were torn. His body showed signs of abuse. He had been strangled. At first, the police thought it was an isolated case, a runaway, a kidnapping gone wrong, another sad story in a country already shattered by decades of violence. But then, another body turned up. This time, near a bridge outside Bogotá. Then another, and another. All boys, all between the ages of 6 and 16. All appeared to have been taken violently, assaulted, and killed. Their bodies were dumped like garbage, in forests, ravines, alongside lonely roads. No one could understand it. How could one person, or even a group, be targeting children across such a wide area? The police were overwhelmed. They had no leads, no witnesses, no clear patterns, except one. Each victim had been last seen near bus stops, parks, or small shops. Someone had spoken to them. Someone had offered them something. A ride, a snack, a smile. And that's when the rumors started. Parents began warning their children, don't talk to strangers, don't take candy, don't go anywhere alone. But the truth was, the monster wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was walking among them, smiling, waving, offering help, and no one knew his name. Not yet, but he was already planning his next move. Because for Luis Alfredo Garavito, this was just the beginning. The newspapers called them the Lost Boys of Colombia. Every week, it seemed, another child disappeared. Some were last seen near schools, others near bus terminals or small-town markets. Their parents cried on television, begging for their safe return. The entire country was on edge. But the police were running out of leads. They had no suspect, no motive, no pattern that made sense. The murders were spread across too many regions: Antioquia, Valle del Cauca, Cundinamarca, Boyacá. It was as if the killer was everywhere and nowhere at once. And through it all, Luis Alfredo Garavito continued his grim work. He moved from town to town, bus to bus, always staying just long enough to find a victim, then disappearing before anyone could ask questions. He had a routine. He'd pick a vulnerable boy, often poor, often alone, often craving affection. He'd approach him with a warm smile, maybe offer him a soda or a snack. He'd pretend to be a relative, a teacher, or a friendly stranger. Then he'd lead the child away, down a quiet path into the woods, behind a building, anywhere no one could hear them scream. And once they were alone, he would take everything, their trust, their innocence, their lives. Then he'd leave their bodies hidden in the wilderness, buried beneath leaves, stuffed into caves, or dumped by the side of the road. No one knew his name, no one knew his face, but the bodies kept piling up, and somewhere, deep in the shadows, Garavito was counting them. By mid-1993, fear had gripped the nation. Parents refused to let their children walk to school. Some villages organized neighborhood watches. Others hired private guards to patrol playgrounds. The government launched public campaigns. Know where your children are, but nothing worked. The murders continued. Every time the police thought they were close, the trail went cold. Witnesses were vague. Descriptions were useless. The killer left no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses who lived to talk. And through it all, Garavito remained untouchable. He was careful, methodical. He never used the same route twice. He changed his appearance slightly, switching hats, shirts, even walking sticks. He knew how to disappear into a crowd. He wasn't just a killer. He was a ghost, a shadow that drifted through towns, always watching, always waiting. He had become an expert at reading children, knowing which ones were lonely, which ones craved attention, which ones would come when called. And he always had a plan, a quiet place, a convincing lie, a deadly outcome. No one knew how many lives he had already taken, not even him. Not yet, but the number was growing. And with every boy he silenced, his confidence grew, because no one was stopping him. The police were desperate. They formed special task forces, brought in psychologists, interviewed survivors of similar crimes in other countries, but nothing fit. The killer was unlike anyone they'd ever encountered. He wasn't killing for money. He wasn't killing for revenge. He was killing for power, for control, for pleasure. And the worst part? He was good at it. Too good. He left no evidence, no witnesses, no patterns that made sense. Every lead they followed ended in frustration. Every press conference ended in tears. And meanwhile, Garavito continued his rampage. He had become a monster of efficiency. He knew how to pick his targets, how to gain their trust, how to lead them away without suspicion, how to silence them forever. And he was proud of it. In his twisted mind, he wasn't a villain. He was a hunter, a master of his craft, a man who could take a life and walk away smiling. And no one knew his name. Not yet, but the clock was ticking because the truth was coming. Slowly, inevitably. And when it arrived, it would shake the nation to its core. Then, finally, someone got lucky. In April 1999, a young boy managed to escape. He had been lured into the mountains by a man who promised him work, helping carry fruit. The boy, no older than 12, went willingly at first. But something felt wrong. The man's hands were rough, his smile too wide. When they reached a secluded spot, the man tied the boy's wrists and began speaking in ways that made no sense. The boy panicked. He screamed. He fought. And somehow, impossibly, he broke free. He ran. He didn't stop running until he saw a police car. What he told them would change everything. He described the man, the location, the way he had been treated. The police listened, really listened. For the first time, they had a witness, a description, a lead. And within days, they had a name: Luis Alfredo Garavito. The monster had a face. The boy's testimony changed everything. Within hours of his escape, police had a name: Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos. They ran his name through old databases, checked local employment records, interviewed neighbors, and what they found sent chills down their spines. Garavito wasn't just some random drifter. He was a known figure in several small towns. A former teacher's aide, a street worker, a man who often volunteered, or pretended to, with local youth programs. He had access to children. He knew how to talk to them. And now they realized he had been doing much more than talking. The manhunt began immediately. Officers fanned out across the region. They showed his photo to shopkeepers, bus drivers, teachers. Someone remembered seeing him near the river where the first bodies were found. Another recalled him asking about lost children. He had been hiding in plain sight all this time. And the worst part? He hadn't stopped. Not even after the first bodies were discovered. Not even after the panic began. He had kept going. Luring, kidnapping, hurting, killing, and leaving the bodies behind like trophies. The police were furious, not just at him, but at themselves. How had they missed him? How many more children could have been saved? But there was no time for regret. They had a lead, and this time, they weren't going to let him slip away. They found him in Villavicencio, a city in the Meta department. He wasn't hiding. Not really. He was walking down the street, just another man in a worn shirt, carrying a small bag. Maybe he thought the heat had died down. Maybe he thought no one would connect him to the disappearances. But the police were ready. An officer recognized him from the flyer. Another verified the ID. Within minutes, they had him in handcuffs. He didn't resist, not at first. He just stood there, calm, almost bored, as they read him his rights. The officers couldn't believe it. The man they had been searching for, the monster behind dozens of deaths, was standing right in front of them. And yet, he looked so ordinary, too ordinary, as if he could be anyone's uncle, anyone's neighbor. They drove him to the station in silence. The boy who had escaped was brought in to confirm the ID. He looked at Garavito and nodded. "That's him. The man who took me. The man who hurt me." And as the pieces fell into place, the investigators realized the truth. This wasn't just a spree. This was a campaign of terror, and Garavito wasn't done confessing, not by a long shot. The confessions began the next morning. Garavito sat in a small, cold interrogation room. His hands were cuffed to the table. A single light bulb hung above him, casting a pale glow on his face. At first, he said nothing, just stared at the wall, but the detectives didn't give up. They showed him maps, photos of missing children, forensic reports, and slowly, he began to talk. "I did it," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to, but I couldn't stop." One name, then another, then another. He described each crime in terrifying detail. The lure, the walk into the woods, the rope, the abuse, the murder, and the graves. He told them where to find the bodies. Some were already known, but many were not. Over the next several days, Garavito confessed to more than 100 murders. The number kept climbing: 112, 118, 122. Each confession sent fresh shockwaves through the nation. How could one man destroy so many lives? How could he live with himself? The truth was, he didn't. Not really. He was a hollow shell of a human being, a monster wearing a mask of normalcy. And now the mask was finally off. The map was covered in red dots, dozens of them, scattered across the country like wounds on the land. Each one marked a crime scene, a disappearance, a body yet to be found. Garavito sat at the table, calm and detached, as detectives crowded around him. He pointed to each location without hesitation. A forest near Medellin, a riverbank in Boyacá, an abandoned schoolhouse outside Cali. He spoke in a low, steady voice, describing exactly where he had taken the boys, how he had lured them, where he had hurt them, and where he had hidden their remains. "We walked into the trees," he said, tapping a dot near Pereira. "I tied his hands with my belt. Then I did what I did." The detectives exchanged horrified glances. Some had to step out of the room. One vomited quietly into a trash bag. It was the first time anyone had heard the full scope of his crimes, not just the number, but the method, the movement, the mindset. He wasn't a sporadic killer. He was an organized predator, someone who planned his moves like a predator stalks prey, someone who knew how to disappear, how to choose his victims, how to leave no trace except the bodies. And now, thanks to his chilling confessions, the authorities had a chance to bring the lost boys home if their remains were still intact. "If you go here," Garavito said, pointing to a dot near Genova, "you'll find him under the rocks, beneath the leaves." The detective nodded, swallowing hard. They left the room to begin the grim recovery process, and Garavito sat alone, waiting, smiling faintly to himself, as if he had just won a game no one else even knew was being played. The recovery teams went to work at dawn. Armed with shovels, brushes, and heavy hearts, they followed Garavito's directions into the forests, ravines, and abandoned lots he had described. Some sites were easy to find. Others took hours of digging through rocky soil, dense underbrush, and dried creek beds. And one by one, they found them. The first body was uncovered near a fallen tree in Antioquia. The remains were skeletal, partially hidden beneath a pile of stones. The boy was no older than 10. Then another, and another. Each discovery sent a ripple of grief through the nation. Parents who had waited years for answers finally had closure, though it came in the form of tiny bones, broken toys, and tattered clothing. One mother collapsed to her knees when she saw her son's sneakers poking out of the dirt. Another father simply stared, silent, as forensic workers gently lifted his child's skull from the mud. Garavito watched the news from his cell. He didn't show remorse, only satisfaction. "I told them where to look," he muttered to himself, as if it were a game he had won. But for the families, it wasn't a game. It was a nightmare finally given a name and a face. The trial began in Bogotá under heavy security. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Reporters from around the world had come to witness the trial of the man they were already calling the monster of the Andes. Garavito sat in the defendant's chair, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled. His face was expressionless. His eyes scanned the room, lingering for just a moment on the victims' families. Some of them screamed as he entered. Others wept silently. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence: confessions, maps, forensic reports, photographs of the crime scenes, and the remains themselves. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of the horror Garavito had unleashed. He had targeted the poorest, the loneliest, the most vulnerable children in society. He had gained their trust, then destroyed their lives. The defense argued insanity, diminished capacity, trauma from his own abusive childhood, but no one bought it. Not the judges, not the jury, not the families, because the truth was undeniable. Garavito wasn't insane. He was evil, and now he would face justice. Day after day, the courtroom heard the stories. A boy who had dreamed of becoming a doctor, a street vendor's son who just wanted candy, a child who had hugged his mother goodbye that morning, never to return. Each testimony tore at the hearts of everyone in the room. Garavito never looked at the witnesses, not once. He stared at the wall or at his hands. Sometimes he closed his eyes, as if he were bored, as if none of it mattered. But it did, to the parents, to the siblings, to the nation. One mother took this stand and described how she had searched for her son for 472 days. She spoke of sleepless nights, of crying herself to sleep, of posting flyers until her hands bled. When she pointed at Garavito and said, "He took my son's smile," the entire courtroom erupted in sobs. The judge called for order, but the damage had already been done. Garavito's mask had slipped, not because of guilt, but because the weight of his crimes could no longer be hidden, not even by silence. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Every seat was filled. Reporters lined the walls. Victims' families sat in the front row, some clutching photos of their missing sons, others holding hands for strength. The air was thick with anticipation, grief, and rage. Garavito sat at the defendant's table, wearing the same orange prison jumpsuit he'd worn for weeks. His hands were shackled. His face gave nothing away. No remorse, no fear, no sadness. Just a blank stare, as if he were watching a movie he'd already seen. The prosecutor rose to deliver the final argument. "He is responsible for the deaths of at least 138 children," she said, her voice steady but breaking at the edges. "He lured them with lies. He took them into the woods. He violated their trust, their bodies, and their lives. And then he discarded them like garbage." She pointed to the map, the one with dozens of red dots, each representing a life lost. Garavito didn't react. He just sat there, as if none of it was real. But it was. For the parents in the room, it was all too real. One mother began to cry silently, her hands trembling as she held a small, faded shirt. Another father clenched his jaw, his eyes locked on Garavito with pure hatred. The judge called for order, but the emotion in the room was undeniable. This wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning. The verdict came after 17 days of testimony. "Guilty," the judge announced, his voice firm and final. The word echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Garavito showed no reaction. He didn't flinch, he didn't nod. He didn't even blink. But the room erupted. A woman screamed. Another collapsed into her husband's arms. Someone shouted, "Murderer!" A father pounded his fist on the railing. The judge called for order, but the sound of grief and rage filled every corner of the room. The prosecutor had asked for the maximum sentence allowed under Colombian law. And she got it. 1,853 years. Technically, it was symbolic. No one could serve that many years, but it was the law's way of saying, "We see you. We condemn you. You will never hurt anyone again." Garavito was led out of the courtroom in silence. His face remained unreadable. As he passed the families, one mother screamed, "You took my son's future!" He didn't look at her. He just kept walking, as if he didn't care, as if he hadn't just been handed the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. But for the victims' families, the verdict brought something they hadn't felt in years: a voice. Their children had been heard, and justice, however imperfect, had been served. The sentence was read formally the next morning. 1,853 years in prison. The number was meant to symbolize justice for each victim, a number so large it was almost abstract, but to the families it meant something real. Garavito would never walk free again. The prosecutor called it a measure of accountability. The defense called it a political spectacle. But for the country, it was closure, or at least the beginning of it. Garavito was fingerprinted again, photographed, led down a long corridor to a high-security transport vehicle. He didn't resist, he didn't speak, he didn't even look back. As the van doors closed behind him, the reporters outside shouted questions. "No comment," one guard said. Inside the prison, Garavito was placed in a special wing, one reserved for the most dangerous criminals. He was given a single cell, no windows to the outside world, no contact with other inmates. He would spend the rest of his life there, alone, isolated, forgotten. Except by the families who would never forget their sons, and by the nation that would never forget the nightmare he had unleashed. Life inside the prison was quiet. Too quiet. Garavito spent most of his days alone in a small concrete cell. No books, no television, just a thin mattress, a metal toilet, and a small window too high to see out of. He was monitored constantly. Psychologists studied him. Guards watched his every move, but he gave them nothing. No breakdowns, no confessions beyond what he'd already given. No signs of regret. Some called him a monster. Others called him a ghost. A man who had done the unthinkable and felt nothing. Occasionally, other inmates would shout threats from down the hallway. "Murderer! Child killer!" But Garavito never responded. He just sat on his cot, staring at the wall, sometimes for hours, sometimes all day, as if he were already dead. And in a way, he was, because the man he had been, the man who laughed with children, who pretended to be their friend, was gone. What remained was a hollow shell, a warning, a lesson. The news of Garavito's arrest and the sheer scale of his crime sent shockwaves through Colombia. For weeks, the story dominated every newspaper, radio broadcast, and television channel. The nation, already battered by decades of violence, drug wars, and political instability, was forced to confront a new kind of terror, one that preyed on its most innocent, children. Lawmakers scrambled to respond. New legislation was drafted within days, stricter penalties for child predators, enhanced monitoring of known offenders, mandatory background checks for anyone working with youth. The phrase, "never again," echoed through the halls of Congress. But laws alone couldn't undo the damage. Across the country, communities held emergency meetings. Parents forbid their children from walking to school alone. Teachers gave special safety lessons. Churches held prayer vigils. Little boys stopped accepting candy from strangers. Little girls clung tighter to their mother's hands. Fear had transformed into action, but also into sorrow, because for every new law passed, there was a mother who had lost her son, a father who had searched for months, a family that would never be whole again. Garavito had exposed a painful truth, that evil could hide in plain sight, and that even in a crowded world, a child could vanish without a trace. And yet, in the midst of the fear, something else began to emerge, a resolve to protect, to remember, to never let another child disappear without a fight. Candles flickered in the wind. Photos of missing boys, smiling, innocent, forever young, were taped to church doors. pinned to telephone poles and laid out on courthouse steps. The entire nation mourned, not just for the children whose bodies had been found, but for the ones still missing, the ones whose families had never stopped searching, the ones whose laughter had been silenced forever. Vigils were held in every major city. In Bogota, thousands gathered in the central plaza, holding white candles and weeping silently. Someone played a melancholy flute melody as the crowd stood together under the stars. In Medellin, a mural was painted in honor of the lost, bright colors depicting boys playing soccer, laughing, dreaming. Beneath it, the words "Siempre los recordaremos." We will always remember them. Families shared their stories on national television. One mother spoke of how she had searched for her son for 1,095 days. Another father described how he still set a plate at the dinner table, just in case. The pain was raw, unfiltered, everywhere. And in the midst of it all, one question lingered in everyone's mind. How did we not see it? How did we let this happen? But even in the mourning, there was unity. A country coming together to grieve, to remember, to vow that no child would ever suffer like this again. Not all scars heal. Some families never recovered. A father in Bogota stopped working after his son disappeared. He spent every day visiting police stations, showing his boy's photo to anyone who would look. A mother in Cali slept with her son's stuffed animal every night, refusing to believe he was gone. Support groups formed in churches and community centers. Parents shared their pain. Some cried together. Others sat in silence, unable to speak. One father said, "They took my son's future. They took my sleep. They took my peace." Another mother whispered, "I still call his name when I walk into a room." The pain didn't fade with time. It evolved, from desperation to acceptance, from anger to advocacy. Some families became activists, pushing for better laws, better protections, better systems to prevent another Garavito from ever rising again. But no matter what they did, one truth remained. Their children were gone, and nothing would ever bring them back. How does a man like Garavito exist? How does he hide in plain sight for years? How does he gain the trust of children, lure them away, hurt them, and walk away without guilt? Experts from around the world studied his case: psychologists, criminologists, sociologists. They found no single answer. His childhood had been abusive, neglected, violent. But so were many others who didn't become monsters. He was intelligent, calculating, but not brilliant. He was charming, but only when he needed to be. In the end, they concluded that Garavito was the result of many things: trauma, opportunity, a deeply disturbed psyche, and a system that failed to notice. His ability to evade capture for so long wasn't just luck. It was a failure of institutions, of communities, of humanity. The lesson wasn't just about one man. It was about all of us, about looking closer, listening deeper, protecting those who cannot protect themselves. What made Garavito tick? That question haunted everyone. He wasn't psychotic. He wasn't delusional. He knew right from wrong, and yet he did unspeakable things over and over again. Psychologists diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, narcissism, and a severe lack of empathy. He viewed children not as human beings, but as objects, as prey. He felt no guilt, no remorse, only a cold, calculated satisfaction. Some experts believed his abusive childhood had fractured his conscience. Others thought his need for control stemmed from years of feeling powerless. But no theory could fully explain the scale of his cruelty. He wasn't insane. He was something worse. He was evil, with purpose. And understanding that became the first step toward ensuring it would never happen again. In the wake of Garavito's arrest, something shifted in Colombia. The fear didn't vanish, it transformed. Parents who once let their children walk alone to school now walked with them. Teachers added new lessons to their daily routines. What is a safe stranger? What do you do if someone offers you candy? Who can you trust? Schools across the country began hosting safety workshops. Police officers visited classrooms, speaking gently to children about boundaries, intuition, and how to recognize danger. Brightly colored posters went up in hallways. No a los extraños. No to strangers. Children were taught to speak up, to trust their instincts, to run, shout, and tell someone they trust if something felt wrong. Communities organized neighborhood watch groups. Volunteers patrolled parks and bus stops, especially during after-school hours. Parents formed WhatsApp groups to share alerts. Local governments installed better lighting in public spaces. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, because the truth was, Garavito hadn't just killed children. He had exposed how vulnerable they were and how unprepared society had been to protect them. Now, slowly but surely, things began to change. More eyes were watching, more voices were heard, and more children were safe. Because if anything good could come from something so horrible, it was this. The world had woken up, and the vulnerable would, and the vulnerable would no longer be invisible. Fear has a way of lingering. Even after the monsters are caught, even after the trials end, even after the candles are blown out, the fear remains. In the years following Garavito's arrest, parents across Colombia became more cautious, more vigilant, more protective. Some stopped letting their sons play soccer in open fields after dark. Others forbade their children from talking to anyone they didn't know, even neighbors or distant relatives. Mothers walked their children to school long after they were old enough to go alone. Fathers checked under beds and in closets before turning out the lights. It wasn't paranoia. It was memory, the kind that doesn't fade easily. Because once you've heard the stories, once you've seen the faces of the lost boys, once you've imagined the terror of a child taken by someone they trusted, you can't unhear it. The fear became a quiet companion in daily life, a shadow at the edge of the playground, a hesitation before answering the door, a double check of the car before buckling in. But along with the fear came something else. Resolve. Because the same parents who walked their kids home also taught them to be strong, to speak up, to trust their gut. They turned fear into preparation, and in doing so, they honored the children who could no longer speak for themselves. They built memorials, not just to remember the boys who were taken, but to ensure their stories were never forgotten. In cities across Colombia, plaques were erected. Parks were named. Gardens were planted in their honor. One memorial in Bogotá featured a wall of photos, dozens of smiling boys, frozen in time. Beneath each photo was a name, an age, and the word recordado, remembered. Families gathered at these places. They brought flowers. They lit candles. They told stories. Not just of how their children died, but of how they lived. A boy who loved soccer, a boy who wanted to be a doctor, a boy who always hugged his mother too tight. The memorials became places of healing, places where grief could be spoken aloud, where love could be honored, where silence could finally be broken. Because forgetting would have meant letting Garavito win. And the people of Colombia refused to let that happen. They remembered, they honored, and they vowed to keep their children safe. not just from monsters like him, but from the darkness he represented. And so, the story ends. Not with silence, but with a whisper to parents to watch their children a little closer, to teachers to listen a little more carefully, to communities to care a little more deeply, to the world to remember that evil often hides in plain sight. But so does goodness, so does courage, so does love. Luis Alfredo Garavito committed unimaginable crimes, but in the end, it wasn't his story that defined an entire nation. It was the stories of the children he took, the parents who never stopped searching, the survivors who found strength in grief, the communities that chose to protect rather than look away. This is not just a story about darkness. It's a story about light, fragile, flickering, but unyielding. It's about the importance of vigilance, of compassion, of memory. So tonight, as you tuck in your child or hug your sibling or walk home under the stars, remember, evil is real, but so is love. And as long as we choose to protect one another, to teach one another, to remember one another, the lost will never truly be gone. They will live on in our hearts, in our actions, and in the promise that we will do better, always. And there you have it. 30 nights, 30 chapters. One story. We began in darkness, with fear, with evil, with questions that had no easy answers. And we ended in light, with resilience, with memory, with love that refuses to be silenced. Luis Alfredo Garavito's crimes shook a nation to its core, but the response, the courage, the change, the commitment to protect the vulnerable proved that even in the wake of unimaginable pain, humanity can prevail. Thank you for walking this journey with us, for listening, for remembering. May we all carry these lessons forward, not with fear, but with purpose. Good night. And may your children always sleep safely, protected by love and guarded by those who care.